Over
Thanks,
to you,
Charles.
Michelle.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Michelle Thomas. I'm the General Manager at FAB9 Makerspace. I studied furniture and product design in London before moving to Australia, and I've worked in product design, development and fabrication in addition to project management for the last 10 years. So before I tell you a little bit more about FAB9, I thought it would be important to just take a quick look at what is a makerspace. So essentially, it's a place to gather to create or tinker, learn and prototype with access to tools, machines, equipment and materials designed for and dedicated to hands-on making. This is our space, FAB9 Makerspace in Footscray. We are a makerspace that empowers makers and creators. The space has been purpose-built, so makers of all skill levels can access training, tools and prototyping equipment needed to turn ideas into physical realities. We opened in June of last year. So we're a 900 square metre multidisciplinary workshop housing digital fabrication technology as well as traditional tools and machinery. So today is about having a bit of a tour of FAB9. So I'm just going to switch screens and show you a virtual tour that was pre-recorded. I might ask you to turn your volume up because the audio is a little bit quiet, but I've also included the link to the video in the chat for this webinar. So if you can't quite hear it that well, you can always refresh your memory by accessing the video. So a quick overview of our space and the tools and equipment that we have inside. So over to the left here is our electronics lab. We actually keep all of our electronics equipment in these cabinets over here, and so when people are working on them, they're typically using these benches here and the overhead power from that's dropped from the ceiling. And this space is also used for some of our workshops and group meetings that happen at FAB9, but it's also our software lab. And these workstations over here are used for CAD applications, and we have a range of those. So we've got a license with SolidWorks that's a Makerspace edition, and that enables us to share our license key with our members. So it's a really great benefit for our members to be able to use our software license for SolidWorks from their own home PC. And it enables people to use a fairly expensive piece of software that they wouldn't normally have access to. We've also got the Adobe Creative Suite applications and other CAD applications such as Rhino, and of course open source software that we're really big fans of at FAB9. So we really like Fusion 360 and Onshape as well. Over here is where you realise the results of your CAD work, and this is our digital fabrication space. So over here we have the laser cutting area, and we actually have 2 laser cutters now since this virtual walkthrough was filmed probably about 6 months ago now. So we've got the Epilog Helix here, the blue machine, which is a 60-watt CO2 laser that typically cuts through 3mm paper or cardboard based wood and plastic materials. And we also have a Trotec Flex Speedy 300, which cuts through up to 9 or 10mm of the same materials, but it also etch or engrave into metals as well. So that's also a CO2 machine, so 120 watt, and fibre machine combined. So coming around here, there's also a workstation over here, and this is how people send their jobs to the laser cutters. And then here is our 3D printer. We run an Ultimaker 2 at the moment, so the bed size is roughly 250 mil square or cubed, and it uses PLA filament, which is fed from a spool mounted on the back of the machine here. although it's not typically digital, this is also where we keep our industrial sewing machine, because this is the cleanest workspace in the makerspace. So it's free from wood dust and sanding and that type of thing. So we typically group all of our clean making applications together. So therefore the sewing is over in this space as well. So the work tables here, also clean workspace, so no sanding or anything happens in here. So if you want to do any of that, you'll need to head through to our assembly space over here. We'll just jump over the reception counter there. So this is our assembly space. This is where makers and members use the benches and work on their own projects. So we keep our hand tools and equipment over here, our sharpening tools and wash up area just over here, and behind us is where we keep our handheld power tools and consumables. So all of these drawers in here. Our PPE is kept over here, and that's obviously necessary if you're going to be stepping into our timber shop, as is the correct accreditation. The bridge here is used to restrict access to this high-risk work area. So only makers that have carried out the induction to use the tools and equipment in this space can actually physically enter the space by using their membership card. So inside we've got the saw stop here, the table saw with a built-in sensor so that it will break the blade before it cuts a person's hand, which is a really great safety feature to have. We've also got Festool drop saw or miter saw, and then the timber prep machines here. So the Minimax jointer here and thicknesser over here. We've also got sanding or linishing machine here, a lathe, a wood lathe over there, a bandsaw, and a table router over here. So it's a table router with an inbuilt Incra guide fence, and this is really great to set up for any repeat joinery. So for example, making lots of dovetails on a set of drawers, for example. So it's quite labour intensive to set up, but if you're doing a lot of something, it does eventually save a lot of time. We'll just jump through into our CNC lab here. This is where we keep the multicam Trident, which is a combination machine. So in addition to the routing and milling tool, which is this one here, it's also got two knives on board. So it cuts a really wide range of material. So in addition to normal sheet material processing that you would expect out of a router, so that's a milling machine, this also has two knives that will drag around across material. So it'll also process foam and polystyrene, as well as fabric, leather, rubber and soft sheet plastics using the knives. So it's a really great combination machine, and we've got a really broad range of members that use this machine, from musicians and musical instrument fabricators to mumpreneurs who ship literally thousands of bows or tens of thousands of baby bows out in a mail order service every month. So it's a really great mix of members and products that come through the machine, which is really great. This space over here is our future welding space. We're still in the process of setting up the extraction. So this is currently used as an extension of our assembly space. Jump back to the presentation now, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for that. If the audio is too quiet, we can obviously share the video with you at the end. It's just in the links in the chat box. So our mission here at FAB9 is empowering makers, and we do that by providing access to the best training, tools and facilities through instructor-led training sessions, and more importantly, peer-to-peer learning from our community. And community is something that we're really big on here. We're an open access space, which means that whether you're a hobbyist or tinkerer working on a dream DIY project, or a hardware entrepreneur trying to create the next world-changing product, or even someone that would like to learn new skills, our space is open to you. Ways that our community at FAB9 engage is through peer-to-peer learning, and that might be in person here in the Makerspace, or through our members portal, or using our Discord channel, which has grown in use exponentially during the COVID-19 lockdown. And in ordinary times, we also run community events, classes and workshops for people to learn new skills. This is just a small example of people using our Discord channel. It's open to members and non-members, and I'll share the link for you in the chat. It's a great place to ask practical questions about might be teaching, DIY projects you might be making, or CAD or software specific hacks you're looking to find an answer for. There will almost certainly be someone there that is going to be able to help you out if you post what you're after. In terms of our maker education here at FAB9, our values are all centered around the principles of lifelong learning, project-based learning, design thinking, mastery-based learning, and we use all of these principles to support educators to deliver meaningful maker education, and also to share our resources to expand beyond your own in-house capabilities. So what we mean by that is offering training and workshops to teaching staff, but also offering programs and projects for students to follow along, whether that learning takes place at schools or physically learning in our makerspace. We're located in Footscray. We're about a 10 or 15 minute walk to the Footscray train station on the river, on the Maribyrnong River. We're in the Dream Factory, so we're actually located on the ground floor of the Dream Factory. And you can always find out more about us checking out our website, our social media, which is FAB9AU, both Instagram and Facebook. But please feel free to ask me anything after Peter and Nathan have presented today as well. I'll be really happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think it's my turn now, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. I'll see if I can share this presentation. Thanks, Michelle. That was a great look around.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't know I was introducing you, Peter. Sorry about that.
I can introduce myself. I'm a big boy.
Sorry, just while you're there, Peter,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Look, just for the people, if you've got questions that you want to have answered, just pop them in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to help them. And if you do have a question, we can certainly alert the presenters to the fact that there's a question that has arisen. So thanks. Don't be frightened to use a chat.
Awesome. So let me see if I'll share this now and if I can find it. Yes, it's appeared this time. Great. So can we all see this?
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you, Michelle. So I'm representing Data Victoria, which is the Teachers Association for Design and Technology Teachers. I'm actually the president of Data Australia, which is the kind of national body. And I do lots of other things as well, which is why for years and years I've been actually describing myself as a failed boat builder, because I have no time to finish this boat that I've been working on. And there's a few reasons for sharing this. One, I thought I'd show my credentials as a maker, but also I thought I'd show a very traditional product that's actually used a lot of new technologies within it. So maybe a little bit of an eye-opener for some of you. But I can't think of a more traditional product than a wooden boat. But this is actually a downloadable boat. It was designed by someone in America using CAD software. It was sent over to Australia by email. It was downloaded and then it was cut out on a CNC router machine. And then it was sent to me and I was told that I would be able to build this in about 4 or 5 weeks. try 4 or 5 years, folks. It's taken me a long time. It's meant to look like this one day. I'll get the sales on it. But for many, many years, it kind of looked like this. And it was in various stages where it was unfinished. But I wanted to add a little bit of personal touch to it. So we found a little kind of Celtic knotwork online that we thought, okay, we'll download that and I'll use the laser cutter at school. So we personalised it a little bit. It's actually not a wooden boat, it's a plastic boat. So it uses epoxy resin all over it. So it's using modern materials as well to kind of make this a kind of cheap, affordable, safe product. And that's me drunk, well, pretty drunk, getting up the courage to cut it in half, because it's quite an innovative design where the front half nests in the back half. So you can actually keep it in a normal sized house. And that's a very strategic photograph, because I didn't show you where I messed up when I cut it in half. I got a bit of a scar there that I had to repair. And that's it now. It actually does work. And I know it works because I threw my son in it to test it. And there was only one major significant leak. So all good. I even tested it with the dog. He said it was okay. And eventually I got in it myself. So I'm taking a bit of a risk showing you a very traditional product and all the associations that might have with design and technologies education. Because when many people think about design and tech, these are the products that come to mind, the pencil case or the knife rack, or if you were lucky and you stayed in it long enough, maybe a big coffee table or a desk or something like that. And there are still places for these types of products in our learning area. I'm not trying to kind of say that there isn't, but there's room for a lot more. This might also be somebody's idea of technology in our learning area. And we've just seen some fantastic examples of great making technology at FAB9. But there are also a lot more technologies that we can use in this space, and many of them are digital. But I'm afraid because of the kind of implementation of this subject for the last 40, 50 years being very similar, everyone has quite a poor perception of design and technologies area within schools, but also in broader communities. And that's largely that it's lockstep instruction, mainly a skills-only approach, and it has little or no innovation. Essentially, it's seen as a certain type of education for a certain type of student. And we're looking to show that it's a valuable learning area for all students. That has some, that poor perception of learning area has some very kind of serious consequences. It's very difficult to get people to consider becoming a design and technologies teacher. And these are results from surveys we've run in 2013 and 2019. Startling statistics, I'm sure you'll agree, that there's a major problem with getting people to become technologies teachers. And in fact, we're using teachers from other learning areas who are not qualified yet and who need to be upskilled. But we also know that schools are starting to kind of close down some workshop areas and that the quality of design tech education isn't where it needs to be in a lot of places. So one of the things that's happened in design and technologies, and it's come along with digital technologies as well, is that there's a focus on the design process. This is really the transferable skill that's valuable for all students, no matter what kind of further study or career they go into. You'll find the design thinking in there somewhere. This is developed by Stanford University. And if that's not a kind of accessible model for you, it can be very simple, and it links directly to the Victorian curriculum and indeed the Australian curriculum for coming up with design solutions. So understanding who you're designing for, what the problem is, coming up with a range of ideas to meet that solution, implementing that final design, coming up with a prototype, testing it, evaluating it. Quite a simple process, really. This is actually the model that I show my students, and I'll sketch this on the whiteboard occasionally to show them how I think the design process works. Often they think I kind of lost the plot, so not only can they not understand my accent, they can't understand what I'm drawing on the whiteboard, but hopefully it shows them that it's quite a messy process. It's something that you have to kind of work your way through. You can't just jump to the end. You have to research, you have to understand, you have to develop a range of solutions before you get to that final design. And of course, we can use lots of digital technologies alongside the traditional. So CAD is obviously a big thing that we're getting lots of our students to use, and we're getting them to think about bigger projects beyond products for their personal use, and we're getting them to work collaboratively in teams, thinking about new technologies and how these can be applied in society. And how do we use new materials and things like additive manufacturing, rapid prototyping? How can we make things more equitable and accessible for everyone? How can we get these technologies out there into society and maybe create a fairer society while doing that? So obviously 3D printing is a big one. That's in schools in lots of places. Great to see it in FAB9 as well. And laser cutting and things like CNC routers and things like that. All fantastic tools to help students and obviously kind of entrepreneurs and designers as well to realize their concepts. There are really no limits now to what we can make, only possibly ourselves and the projects that we set students. There's another concept I want to kind of raise the awareness of in Victorian curriculum and Australian curriculum, and that's around preferred futures. This is a key idea behind design and technologies and indeed digital technologies. And we want our students thinking about what sort of world they want to live in, what do they want society to be like, how can we work towards that? Now, maybe living in high-rise tower blocks isn't a great idea now after we've seen what's happened in Melbourne with COVID-19. But these are discussions and ideas our students should be thinking about. Maybe we don't want to have mobile offices in our parks, but maybe we do. And maybe we want to utilise more spaces for growing food and creating better lives for everyone, no matter where they live. Obviously, society has kind of changed drastically in recent times, and the COVID normal is obviously changing the way we're doing education, it's changing the way we're working, it's changing the way we're socialising. So there are lots of opportunities for innovation within this new reality as well. It wasn't so long ago we were looking at other major problems, especially in Australia. We became the kind of focus point for climate change for a while there. That seems like such a long time ago now, but it's definitely a problem that the world is now starting to recognise that we really need to deal with, and it's a massively complex problem all over the world. And design and technologies is the subject area in the Australian and Victorian curriculum to tackle this. If you search sustainability in those websites, you'll find that it's mentioned most in the technologies learning area. It's something actually our students are incredibly passionate about, and you saw that in Australian streets when the students went out on their school strikes. And in fact, Greta Thunberg actually credits Australian students with making it a global movement. It wasn't until Australian students took to the streets in mass numbers that it really took off around the world. And that's one I always include in there for the makers. It's a good one, a bit of innovation with some of these things. It can seem overwhelming and it can seem like it's too big to tackle in a school setting, but actually it's quite accessible. The United Nations have already broken these things down into all the goals that we need to work on. There's a huge number of resources online for these things, not just for adults and politicians, but for students, aimed at making it accessible for them to kind of start thinking about. It's very empowering for students as well to tackle these issues and feel like they can make a difference. But obviously there's more changes than that on the horizon. We have things like the fourth industrial revolution, which we're actually in the midst of now. And if you're not sure about what that is, there have been several industrial revolutions in the past, and we're now in the mix of the fourth one. The biggest part of which is going to be AI and how that's going to affect the way that we work and live in the future. So definitely something our students need to be aware of and starting to think about even the ethical implications of this. And it's going to change the way that they work. The gig economy is here. It's very real. It means that students are going to have to be lifelong learners. It was great to see FAB9 mention that as well. So students being able to kind of upskill themselves, get access to new technologies, get support where they require it. These are going to be kind of key elements in any kind of future economy. And our students need to be aware of that reality as well. It can be quite scary sometimes when you're thinking about some of these technologies. This robot, I've seen videos of this, it scares the life out of me. But maybe it's not all scary. Maybe it's just about doing what we already want to do, but doing it a lot better. Using new technologies, making it more accessible, trying to make the world a better place when we're developing these preferred futures. So I'd like to leave you with just a few thoughts on that. If we do focus on preferred futures, We really want our students to be tackling problems worth solving. We want to be using design and digital technologies. They're not separate, even though they're two halves of the kind of technologies curriculum. They're just tools. And what we need to do is be using the appropriate tools for whatever problem the students are doing. So I'd like to see a lot more integration there. We do need to be upskilling existing teachers in schools, and that's where DataVic, DLTV, and places like FAB9 can really help us out. Not all the schools can afford all the toys, so being able to access a place like that and get professional support is fantastic. And hopefully we can attract new and skilled professionals into technologies teaching in the future, because without them, it's not looking great. So we really need to kind of make the most of what we've got and support each other. So thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you also to Michelle earlier. It's just great to have your perspectives, and I'm just gonna I'm just gonna bring myself up now. When we put this webinar together, we really wanted to have a perspective from DataVic, being the subject association that also represents design and tech teachers, and DLTV, which is our subject association that represents digital technologies teachers. So the DLTV perspective, or from the point of view of digital technologies, I thought I'd talk a little bit about this. And what is digital technologies anyway? We often start, when I'm talking about digital technologies, I often start with this because sometimes people are a bit confused about what it is as a learning area. I wanted to touch on some of the things and some of the things that Peter mentioned, some of the thinking skills that he mentioned, and creating preferred futures I'll touch on as well. And then I want to just look at some of those interesting links between the digital and the tangible, and interesting connections between our two subject areas, our two technologies areas. For those who don't know, digital technologies is a learning area for F to 10. It involves basically computer science concepts and related thinking skills. The kinds of things that students get involved in when they do digital technologies. They look at hardware and software, networks and security, so a bit of theory around that stuff. They then do a lot of stuff around data, gathering data, analyzing it and presenting it. And then there's the bit that everyone thinks about when they think about digital technologies, which is coding and algorithms. And then there's also quite a bit on the impact of technologies as well. So all those things appear in the curriculum. It falls under technologies along with design and tech, and that creating preferred futures is an overarching principle. We sometimes talk about three ways of thinking in digital technologies. You've got design thinking and systems thinking, but you've also got, particularly in our subject, you've got computational thinking as a big emphasis. I've got the links there. We can share those in the chat, but that takes you to the Australian one and the Victorian one. We're quite lucky in Victoria because our curriculum for digital technologies is not that different to the Australian one. It is structured differently, but the content descriptors are almost identical. So if you find resources for the Australian curriculum, it's quite easy to see how they work for our content descriptors. So design thinking, as Peter went into there when he showed the D Stanford model, it's employing a creative process to understand a problem or an opportunity, and then to imagine and design a solution. And as far as digital technology is concerned, we're obviously interested in digital solutions. So it might be an app or a game or a program. It might be your digital solution might be a data structure or some kind of data analysis and visualization. Or it might be something like a robot that you've coded or an electronic prototype that you've coded. Systems thinking is that sort of big picture thinking, looking at connections and dependencies between components and parts of a system. And again, in Digitech, what are we looking at there? Well, some of the obvious systems you can probably think of are like a computer or a smartphone, which all have all these components that have to work together. But also the internet is a very, very complex system, networks that connect computers together and other devices together. And then software solutions that are used in different contexts, their interactions and their impacts. So an example we sometimes give in a secondary context is your school brings in a new learning platform for students, or maybe a platform for sorting out excursions or something like that. And the IT people at your school have to put in a lot of work to make sure it's integrated properly with all the other systems at the school, with the student logins and student passwords and all that kind of stuff. And then computational thinking. This is the one that's a bit more unique to Digitech, but this is the steps for making an algorithmic solution to a problem. In other words, redoing a problem and coming up with a solution in such a way that a computer can effectively carry it out. So we use this when we design and develop problems or our data solutions. And there's those 4 steps that are enrolled in computational thinking. And again, as Peter said, all these skills are actually transferable. They're very useful in other subject areas. And DLTV's had a bunch of webinars in the last couple of terms during the restrictions, and some of these I can point you to, where we've gone into these 3 ways of thinking, and we've looked at connections to literacy and numeracy and science and things like that. This is the bit though that I wanted to really get to when we look at connecting here with technologies. And this was a big table that we set out when a colleague, John Pierce, and I went and did a professional learning workshop at a school. And just look at all the different drones and robots and, Lego, robots that can be assembled like Lego, other robots that are just rover robots, all the different electronics kits. The BBC Microbit is one of the biggest ones at the moment that we could talk about. VR and AR technologies. So there's an awful lot of choices for schools when it comes to the gadgets and the different things. And what a lot of these have in common is that they're trying to bring some tangibility to that coding process. So it's not just all on the screen, but that students get to see something happening. They get to see the robot move around, or they get to see something turn or spin or light up. And there's a huge amount of engagement that can come from that. So coded electronics, for example, is part of a solution that is tangible. And this is a photo from a workshop that we did with some teachers there. And you can see they've been doing some design notes on the big pad there, and then they're using the electronics to use some sensors and light something up, and then they're doing the code on their laptops. So students can see the effect of their code that way. And the amount of things that you can do is so much. Some of the sensors that are available, you can read temperature, you can read light, you can read the presence of certain gases, you can read pH levels, distance. You've got ultrasonic sensors for distance. So there's so many things that you can use as part of these sort of tangible projects. You can do communication across the internet if you want. So these can go in all sorts of different sort of directions. So you can probably imagine at this point that there's a project that could be, become an accumulation of student learning, where they're combining physical design, materials, and manufacturing, whether that's traditional or digital manufacturing, skills that they're learning in the areas of design and tech, bringing in electronics or robotic parts, and then bringing in their coded algorithms. And you've got a prototype or a proof of concept for a product. So this is something that possibly could be something that students could work towards as a project. When we think about that though, there's also this notion of getting the balance right, because our 2 technologies learning areas do have our own priorities. So for example, in digital technologies, we are concerned about that the coding that the students do has to be sufficiently complex. It can't just be if this, do that. It has to have a little bit more than that. It needs to maybe read some data and do more with it, or it needs to use a bit more complex algorithms. Data has to come into it at some point in our subject. It's important. So, and I'm sure Peter would be able to say that from the design and tech point of view, there's certain priorities that would want to be included as well. Just before I finish, I wanted to mention a couple of other interesting connections. This is the little microbit, and there's a very simple CAD program called Tinkercad that's available that students often use for doing 3D printing designs or laser cutting designs. And it actually has the microbit there as a placeholder object, so that if you're designing a case or something that it has to fit into, you've got it there and you can do the CAD around it. And I noticed just as I went on to Tinkercad to get that screenshot that Tinkercad now also allows you to do CAD through code blocks. So there's a little program there where you create the red cube, you move it down by 15 millimeters, and then you add the roof on the top. And that's being done through a program that's sequential using those little coding blocks. And this is one that I've been aware of for a while too. Anyone who's a Digitech teacher probably knows about the turtle, which is where you have a little sort of cursor on the screen, and it moves around and it drags lines behind it, and that's how you can draw things on the screen, by giving it little commands like go forward, turn left 90 degrees, go forward again. And this Beetlebox program does the same thing, except in 3D. So you move the turtle around and it drags sort of goo behind it in order to make 3D shapes. So there's a little program on the left there, and then on the right is what it's produced. And that can then be exported for 3D printing. So another interesting little connection between code and something that's being produced tangibly. Just as we get to the last part of today's webinar, the three of us, Peter, Michelle, and I, have a few questions that we thought we might discuss as a little bit of a panel. So I'll invite Peter and Michelle to come back on, and maybe we can talk about some of these questions. But if you do have any questions of your own that you thought you might ask about any of our subject areas or about FAB9, please do feel free to put that in the chat, and we can definitely talk about that. So I'll leave these questions on the screen, and we might just see if there's any things that we pick up on in that list that we might want to talk about. So did you want to go first, Michelle, about any of those?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll steer clear of speaking from the school's perspective and leave that to you, Peter and Nathan. But from our perspective, I think if we just touch on what is a makerspace and how do schools tend to implement these, it's such a broad scope in terms of the resources that are available to different schools. And I think, you know, we've heard a lot of stories about schools that have some amazing tech and other schools that are getting by with, you know, just the traditional making facilities. And in terms of how best to implement these, I think it does often come down to a combination of financial and teaching resources. So not only what type of technology the school can afford to procure, but where does the interest level lie in terms of the available teaching staff? And I think that can often be quite a large limitation in terms of the scope of resources schools tend to source in terms of buying and implementing in schools. So, you know, one way that we try to overcome some of these challenges is to talk about different types of fabrication and making, and even taking a lot of steps back and thinking about the design process. And I think we've all touched on the notion of design thinking and lifelong learning and instilling those values as part of the learning process. And we often run workshops for educators around that. So it's an invitation to essentially invite educators to think outside of the box and outside of what is available at their fingertips. So rather than feeling penned in to certain types of technology, it does give you know, the scope of thinking forward and thinking, well, what other technology is out there? How could we implement digital fabrication even though we don't have 3D printing and we don't have laser cutting and we don't have a CNC machine? So outsourcing
potentially the fabrication and teaching the design skills that are attached to that. So partnering with industry, partnering with other makerspaces, partnering with other schools even, to share skills and share technology around. I'm not really sure how much that happens among schools. Peter, what's your thought on that?
Very, well, it's all over the place, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, right.
I was actually interviewed last week by some PhD researchers who are just focused on makerspaces. You know, so it's PhD worthy. There's so much.
I think we're part of that study as well. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it's massive. I know that we've tried maybe like half a dozen different approaches over the past couple of years to create something we would call a makerspace, all with varying degrees of success. I think the kind of drop-in, make, repair thing is fine. It can be a bit limiting though, and it really requires students and teachers to kind of bring something each time.
Yeah.
Whereas we've maybe had more success with more focused approaches. So we're going to do this type of project next week. Come along and try it out. One of the things that we've developed at Northcote High, where I teach, is a precious plastics centre. So we have turned ourselves into a kind of community recycling centre for plastics.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and the VCAL students there run the program, so they run the whole thing, and they've got a shipping container, and it's all very hipster. And they create this material that then the students can use in the other year levels to make any product they want from this material. Or VCAL students themselves can make something and sell it, or whatever they want to do. So each year they could come up with a different business model just using this resource. And we found more success with that type of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that something that they're doing all parts of that process? So they're crushing and extruding the material out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
but
cool.
well beyond that, so they're creating the kind of social media around it. They're doing the communications to the community. They're contacting local primary schools and doing collection drives, and then they're bringing primary school kids in and doing a tour of it. So that with a makerspace that has a kind of purpose and a function, you can build a lot of things around it, and it's a legacy project that they can train the next students coming up each year. So we found that to be the most successful, rather than just the kind of drop-in model.
Yeah, I think one of the other really valuable points that you touched on in your presentation was the idea of solving problems worth solving, and you know, thinking around a problem as opposed to coming up with the problem retrospectively to suit the robot that you're interested in making, or you know, all of that reverse engineering that tends to happen in the in the design process that I guess doesn't really follow along the lines of design thinking. And I think that is what really creates strong engagement and that repeat learning, coming back to the same practice, and it's that habit building that we understand to be the real secret sauce, I guess, of building lifelong skills. So encouraging members or new learners to revisit a subject that you know, there's a lot of research around it, but it's essentially logging in or checking in or performing that activity 5 times before it becomes part of their habit. And that's one of the real key activities around developing the skills of lifelong learning. And it's, I guess it's a thing that it's hard to really tap into. What are those activities that will keep people coming back regularly enough that they just build up that momentum? You know, when you're teaching something that has the tactile, physical nature, it's experienced in muscle memory. So learning how to chisel timber, for example, it's something that you are aware of because the task that you're learning becomes easier and more natural to you. And often when it's not a tactile activity, it's harder to read and harder to recognize it happening. So I think that's one thing that we've really tapped into recently in terms of creating engaging content that keeps people coming back until they've just quite tipped over the edge of
wanting to come back themselves.
I was going to add too, like I've seen also makerspaces where, you know, there are products out there that let you more easily work with cardboard, for example. I think there's a product that we've sometimes run along called Make Do, and it's just like little plastic screws and stuff that can help students to work with cardboard. I noticed David's just asked a question there: is there a role for school libraries in hosting a makerspace? And you certainly do hear about a lot of school libraries that take the role of hosting the makerspace. I imagine there's a lot of pros and cons to that. Do you have any thoughts on that one, Peter?
Yeah, like it's an interesting one. It's a space that's trying to redefine itself within schools. And they're trying to make connections beyond the kind of traditional ones with English or humanities or those other faculties that would normally engage with them. So it's great that they're making these connections, and lots of them are kind of putting tech in there that students can play with. But they're not supported with staff generally. So there's not that kind of support for the students when they get stuck. So there are limitations. Now there's ways around that. Most of them involve money and time, which schools don't have a lot of. But it's another avenue to look at. At my school, we've put a lot of the kind of the gadgets and the robots that you showed earlier on. We've just put them in the space. And initially, the librarians wanted to kind of like book them out individually and treat them like books. And I was trying to say, listen, that's not really going to work with this. We're just going to have to kind of put them there and let them play and let them and trust them. And if someone steals something, fine. But giving students more access to this type of technology is definitely going to be something we're doing, whether that's in a different space in the school or whether it's just in the subjects we currently run, but we incorporate more of this new technology. I think that there's pros to both of those approaches.
Yeah, I was going to mention too, and I forgot this, but hopefully people are aware in Victoria of the tech schools, which are, you know, I think there's 10 in Victoria in different parts of the metropolitan and regional areas, where you can go and see, for example, that I've been to one where they have a whole room set up with 3D printers, another where, you know, they've got more of a science focus. So it sort of depends on the one. They're all run a little bit differently, but definitely worth getting connected to your local one, because it gives your teachers and your students a chance to see things that you might want to try before investing in it at your own school, possibly. We've often seen digital technologies related things, different types of robots or different types of electronics at these as well.
Yeah. I think one thing that I'd like to add to the idea of whether schools can invest or create a makerspace in a library is nurturing the students that really do show interest and encouraging them to share their knowledge and building that peer-to-peer learning platform. You know, picking up on the kids that are doing really well and really experimenting and teaching them how to share that knowledge and share that learning by creating video content, doing small presentations, trying to put a spin on it that takes it out of the library and out of the teaching environment and puts it into a more real-life application, often is a way of, I guess, changing the perception, which is something that you've, I guess, identified as being, you know, one of the barriers, I guess, to digital and technical learning.
Yeah, the mention of the let them play really made me think about how the technologies areas, we have this opportunity, because in the case of digital technology, it's very new. In the case of design and tech, it's got a legacy, but we have this opportunity to really encourage students to learn by doing. And it's not that you can't do that in other subjects, but a lot of subjects over time, I think, have this trend towards kind of systemizing it all and losing that chance for students to learn by doing and to learn by failing and trying. And it's great in Digitech with coding. It's a great opportunity because you have such a quick iterative process. You know, I got this wrong. I try again. I try again. You can do similar. It takes a bit longer with a 3D printer, but you can still do that iterative process, and you can have that try and fail thing. And it's so valuable. And I would hate for our subjects to go down that route over time where we lose that spark, because it's so important.
Look, I might just take this opportunity to do, we are past our official finish time, but look, the discussion that's happening at the moment is wonderful, and we're more than happy to facilitate that and hang about. But in terms of the formal presentation, that's the end of the session. But please, I've been really interested in the discussion that's happening. So hang around, we'll be here, and we invite you to stay too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd just like to thank Peter and Michelle and Nathan on behalf of DLTV. And I'm looking for more ways for DataVic and DLTV to work together, and this is a great example of the sort of stuff. There's a lot of correlations I can see here. Now, Dave, I don't know if you're still on the call, but Dave is from Wangaratta, and they have the local library has a space, which is quite interesting. They got support around that. Dave, I don't know if you want to put the link in the chat if you're still there, but that was a really yeah. Okay. So what's your project called up there, Dave? Just can you remind me with the local library?
So yeah, the digital hub in the Wang library there. So they've got some government funding a couple of years ago to fund a space for the community to access for digital technologies and support. So yeah, it's a growing space, and it's partnered with the GoTAFE there, who have a significant sort of involvement with their resources and lending as well.
I'm thinking there's another webinar.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear more about it.
Thanks, Dave.
No dramas.
Yeah, so as Daryl said, please feel free if we are at the end of the formal part, so feel free to drop off if you need to. But if there's any other questions that anyone wanted to have the three of us give our little opinions of, please feel free to put that in the chat, and we can do that. Or maybe just what we might do in the meantime is just any final words from each of us that we might want to relate or to pick up on any of the questions we feel haven't really been touched on. So maybe start with Michelle, and then Peter, and then me.
Yeah, so I guess from my part, I just want to open or extend an invitation to all of you to feel free to ask us anything, basically. I will share our Discord link in the chat, so it's a great place to jump in and ask any tech questions, but you can also feel free to email me if you're setting up a space or buying any equipment. We welcome you to ask for our opinion. We're very happy to give it. I'm just going to pop my email in there as well. So feel free to contact me at any point for pretty much anything. And thank you so much to DLTV and to DataVic for having me along today.
No worries.
Yeah, I was just looking at the questions that were left, actually, and one of the biggest things that we need to think about is that it's not two separate groups of teachers. You know, quite often it's the same teacher. It's working in spaces, and it's the same teachers that need to be upskilled in both the design and the digital tech. And so there's a lot of people who are very brave and enthusiastic, and who come to our learning area even though they're not trained in it. And those are the people that we really need to kind of support. And those are the people that would benefit from a more integrated approach between the two kind of learning areas. And if we can show an accessible way for people to do that, you know, and to skill them up over time, then I think that's a winner. The sooner we start thinking about these as a combined holistic learning area, the better.